Hey, what's up, everyone? Today I'm going to debunk the false implications that people think evolution has with regards to racism, specifically human evolution. And there's two main claims I'm going to debunk. The first is that evolution justifies racism, hence we should practice racism. The second claim has a pretty similar base, that uh, because evolution justifies racism, it should be disregarded, and this is usually made by creationists. But I'm going to preface this video by addressing a certain question I've seen asked a lot on online forums, which is, are black people more closely related to apes, monkeys, and animals than are other races of people? Oh. Human beings, whether we be white, black, brown, yellow, red, or any combination of the above, are apes. Apes are monkeys, and monkeys are animals.
Well, I'm an ape. I'm an African ape, and I'm very proud to be an African ape.
It doesn't make any more sense to ask if one race of people would be more closely related to any of those three groups than it would to ask if, say, greyhounds are more closely related to dogs, mammals, or vertebrates than are other sighthounds. No, we're all apes, we're all monkeys, we're all animals. Although there are specific apes that these racist imbeciles like to compare black people to, like specifically, the gorilla. Which really doesn't make a lot of sense if you think about it, because these racists are trying to portray black people as violent criminals. Well, then why the fuck would you compare them to a peaceful animal like a gorilla? Okay, I mean, yes, gorillas are very powerful animals, but they're also very docile ones. I mean, they're not like chimps who can be, very violent and aggressive. Within a gorilla troop, there's rarely any kind of, violence. Usually most confrontations are between rival silverbacks, and even those rarely get violent. It's mostly just hooting and beating their chest.
So it seems really very unfair that man should have chosen the gorilla to symbolise all that is aggressive and violent, when that's the one thing that the gorilla is not, and that we are.
But it seems like this whole 19th century Victorian eugenics bullshit notion that black people are somehow less evolved than white people or other races has survived to the present day on online forums. And, well, to show you what I'm talking about, I'll read some comments on, or a comment on a BBC documentary about Homo erectus, which is flawed in many ways, but I'll get back to that later. It's by a United Europa official. Yep, and all Africans have traces of Homo erectus DNA. Black interbred with most primitive Homo erectus thousands of years. Thanks to African Genome Project, we know that 3% of genomes of sub-Saharan blacks originally came from another hominid species not found in the DNA of Asian and European. An international team of scientists studied DNA skeletal remains did not look like one from a recent Negro. Instead, it shared similarities with archaic fossil skulls. DNA testing on sub-Saharan African populations has shown that the ancestors of modern Africans interbred with a now extinct archaic species not found in the DNA of non-Africans. Cites a website, New Genetic Science, that modern humans mated with Homo erectus. Another website, Re-examining Out of Africa Theory and Origin of Europoids, Caucasoids in Light of DNA Genealogy, and he cites another website. Well, before I debunk a lot of these claims, I'm going to, kind of give a lowdown on human evolution to kind of, put roots on this. The first member of the genus Homo was Homo habilis. He was descended from the Australopithecines. He evolved around 2.5 million years ago, and he probably would have looked a lot like them. He would have been pretty ape-like, probably pretty hairy, but he was the first uh, bipedal ape to be, making tools. Around 2 million years ago, Homo habilis evolved into Homo ergaster, which probably looked a lot more like us because what we can tell from the skeleton, they were pretty athletic. They're probably running around a lot, and if you're running around a lot in the hot sun, you probably would want to be, largely furless. And the most famous fossil of Homo ergaster is the Turkana boy found in Kenya. Then around 1.8 million years ago, some Homo ergaster started to migrate out of Africa into the Middle East, where they evolved into Homo erectus. Now, Homo erectus is so similar to Homo ergaster that many paleoanthropologists consider them to be one of the same species. Homo erectus then spread throughout South Asia, East Asia, and Southeast Asia, making it all the way down to Indonesia. In fact, the most famous Homo erectus fossil found was the Java man. And what happened next is very controversial because back in, I think it was 2004, scientists working on the island of Flores uncovered the remains of a miniature hominid that they named Homo floresiensis. And some paleoanthropologists speculated that they were descended from a population of Homo erectus who got stranded on the island and then became miniaturized, but others claim that Homo floresiensis is much more primitive than Homo erectus and was descended from a pre-erectus migration of Homo habilis out of Africa that made it all the way down to Indonesia, while leaving no evidence of their journey except for Homo floresiensis itself. And I guess some uh, anecdotal evidence for this claim might be found in the local folklore. They speak of a creature called the Ibu Gogo, which is described as a very miniature and hairy hominid, because Homo floresiensis only died out around 13,000 years ago, and we know that there were Homo sapiens living on the island then. Now, I don't really entertain the notion that these stories prove they're still alive, although some people actually think that Homo floresiensis might still be alive in some remote parts of Indonesia. But I could definitely see folklore being based off of them. And given that they are described as hairy, which habilis was, and Homo erectus probably was not, that might be some evidence that the pre-erectus migration theory is correct. Although Homo floresiensis was seemingly using fire, which Homo habilis probably wasn't, but Homo erectus, ergaster, and all later human species were. Homo floresiensis also used stone tools of the same quality of erectus, so that could be evidence that they evolved from erectus, although both the habilis that migrated out of Africa and the Homo erectus may have evolved their intelligence convergently. But back in the Middle East, some Homo erectus migrated into Europe, where they became another species known as Homo antecessor. And Homo antecessor had a noticeably larger brain size than Homo erectus did. Theirs was about 1,000 cubic centimeters, while Homo erectus's was a little over 600. And what happened after that is again very controversial because we see a new species called Homo heidelbergensis develop, which had a brain size of about 1,100 to 1,400 cubic centimeters, while modern humans' brains are about 1,350 cubic centimeters. What happened next is still hotly debated, because some paleoanthropologists say that Homo heidelbergensis evolved in Africa from Homo ergaster and from there spread into Asia and Europe. Others believe that they evolved in Europe from Homo antecessor and from there spread into Asia and Africa, but regardless of where they came from, they seem to have completely displaced Homo ergaster and Homo antecessor. Now, what happened to Homo erectus is a bit less clear. Um, there were some Homo erectus remains found along a river in Indonesia that were originally dated to about 50,000 years ago, which would have made them a contemporary of modern humans. But reanalysis seemed to have indicated that those bones were at the very youngest 143,000 years old, and in all probability Homo erectus was probably gone by about 500,000 years ago. And that's about the time that Homo heidelbergensis really began to, migrate. From what we can tell, at least from the fossil record, Homo heidelbergensis first shows up around 700,000 years ago, although there's some genetic evidence that indicates that they were indeed much older than that. But like the first division in the Homo heidelbergensis species when it first started to divide was between the African and Eurasian populations. The African populations would ultimately give rise to Homo sapiens, us, while in Eurasia they split again between the ones in Western Eurasia who would become the Neanderthals. Meanwhile, in East Asia, they became the Denisovans, a mysterious people known only from a few 40,000-year-old bones found in a cave in what is now southern Siberia. But we have been able to extract DNA from these bones, and from comparing them to human and Neanderthal DNA, it seems that they were more closely related to Neanderthals than they were to us. Also, as a side note, from comparing human and Neanderthal DNA, it seems that we began to diverge around 1,000,000 years ago, which indicates that Homo heidelbergensis, our ancestor, was probably around prior to 700,000 years ago. But when analyzing the Denisovan DNA, scientists found that a good portion of it was shared with neither humans nor Neanderthals, and this may have come from interbreeding with Homo erectus, so they might not have been completely displaced by the migrating Homo heidelbergensis, but we don't have any Homo erectus DNA, so we have really no way to compare it and know for sure that it is in fact erectus DNA. But meanwhile, back in Africa, around 150,000 years ago, there was a massive ice age that, well, it caused a big drought in Africa, and it caused the human population to bottleneck down to only a few thousand individuals. And in this population bottleneck, we have who is known as the mitochondrial Eve, from whom virtually everyone on Earth has inherited their mitochondrial DNA. But it seems that around 120,000 years ago, the Homo sapien population began to recover, and they began to migrate out of Africa. Some went to what is now Djibouti, crossed over into Yemen, and was probably, beachcombing, and from there they made it all the way, like, across India and into Southeast Asia, and we do find some fairly old human remains all the way in China. Like, one was the Luoxiong men. But around around 74,000 years ago, an event happened known as the Toba catastrophe, where the Toba supervolcano erupted in what is now Sumatra. As a little side note, there was another pre-Toba attempt to migrate out of Africa. This one went up the Nile and tried to go into the Middle East, but they seemingly didn't make it further than Israel before they died off. And meanwhile, back in Africa, the Toba eruption caused another population bottleneck.